Thanks for joining us here on WeatherNation. From Wilson's Warbler to Canadian Geese, fall marks the migration of millions of birds across the country. To learn more about this overnight traveling phenomenon, we are joined now by Dr. Kyle Horton, an ornithologist and aero-ecologist. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us just how many birds are making the migration during this time of the year, and how do you get that data?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love chatting about birds and bird migration. We're well into fall migration across most of North America right now, and night after night, there's going to be hundreds of millions of birds flying. Across the season, we'll be looking at billions of birds making their southward journey into their non-breeding or wintering grounds. And the way we quantify those numbers, right? It's really hard to count 100 million birds or 100,000 birds, let alone a billion birds. And we rely on radars to actually quantify their movement. And so those are the same radars that you might see quantifying a rainstorm or a thunderstorm or severe weather coming across most of North America. We can use those same radars to quantify the movements of birds.
And of course, as we're talking about radars, I mean, the weather itself as well has a huge role on their migration patterns. Can you explain a little bit about some of the biggest factors that play into migration?
Yeah, sure. And so a lot of these birds that we're talking about that make up these movements are pretty small. They're tens of grams. They're flying sometimes hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometers to make this journey. And so they're really selective of when they're going to take flight at night. And so most of migration's occurring at night. And so these birds really time up when they're going to fly, take off. And so they're going to be reliant on a tailwind. So winds that are favorable to push them, at least in this season, heading south. Temperature is going to be a big factor that we see is quite predictive of their movements. And so those are really the dominant patterns that we see is temperature and then wind speed and direction. Again, you wouldn't want to be a 10-gram bird bouncing around in the winds, just like we don't want to be humans bouncing around in planes when it gets turbulent. And so birds are really optimized for selecting when to fly.
So do they ride frontal systems to make their journey a little bit easier, or do they maybe try to avoid that because it's a little bit too much?
Yeah, and so usually they're timing it up with that passage of a frontal system. And so, sometimes, through the night, you'll see a rain system coming through. You can see it on the radar. And then right behind that, if that system's usually moving west to east and then pushing a little bit southward, as that passes through, you'll start to see the birds actually lift off and try to ride those winds behind the system. But they certainly don't want to be bumping into the rain at night. And so rain really shuts down migration. And so just like winds are positive usually for birds taking off, rain will really shut down the system at night.
That makes sense. Can you explain more on the lights out movement and how that might impact migration?
Yeah, sure. And so birds have evolved to migrate at night. They've been, migrating at night for hundreds of thousands of years. In the last, couple hundreds of years, we've really started to illuminate the nighttime sky, and so this disrupts migratory birds. As a general phenomena, we see that migratory birds are really attracted to bright lights at night. This can cause them to be disoriented during migration and cause them to circle and call. That circling around those light structures can sometimes lead to fatal collisions with buildings or glass at night or even guy wires on towers. And so if we can reduce lights at night, we can hopefully try to mitigate some of that attraction and then ultimately try to mitigate some of those fatal collisions with birds. And so just flipping the switch at night can, everyone can collectively work towards that when possible or when you feel safe doing it. And that can all collectively help migratory birds.
Well, that's very interesting information and something I definitely did not know, such an easy thing that people can do to help them out. And I kind of want to go back to talking about birds and radar. So sometimes you can see the flocks of birds on radar. Can you explain how we can tell they're birds or if they're storms, just for an everyday viewer?
Yeah, sure. So if you're looking at radar data, uh, the radars are designed at their most basic level. These meteorological radars do detect rain content, water content up in the sky. Birds are composed of mostly water as well, like most living things. And so as we send out our signal, we get a lot of return from rain, but also birds. The rain that we're accustomed to seeing on radar is really intense. It's quite dense and it shows up as a much stronger signal. On most color scales, that's often in the reds to oranges on our color scales. On most radar depictions, birds are showing up in the color scale in sort of the blues and greens. By texture, it looks very different though. Rain usually has these elongated shapes. They're sort of irregular. Birds are pretty smooth in terms of what it looks like from a landscape level. And so if you start to look at the imagery, it really pops out at you. It might not at first, but give it a little bit of time and you'll be able to quickly discern birds versus precipitation at night or during the day.
And speaking of that, are there any hot spots where birds are migrating from right now?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And so each night, we actually make forecasts of where those hotspots will be. We host these forecasts at a website called Birdcast. You can see that at birdcast.info. And so we make forecasts that get updated just like a meteorological forecast of where and when birds will be flying. And then you can track the migration through the night in our real-time depictions of what the radar data look like. And so you can track the speed and the direction and where the greatest numbers of birds are passing. And we usually encourage folks, if you're interested in birds, trying to go out maybe the next morning and see where those birds landed and identify them and just enjoy the colorful birds that just flew over your house the night before.
That sounds lovely. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for taking the time to talk with us and explain the migration patterns and just things that people could know. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a good one.
Of course, up next, we've got more details of your Eastern regional forecast. Don't go anywhere.